In 2019, roughly 2,000 active satellites orbited Earth. That number had grown slowly, steadily, over more than 6 decades of spaceflight. Today, that number has grown to over 16,000, and it's still climbing week by week. That's not a typo. In under 7 years, humanity has added more satellites to orbit than in the previous 60 combined. So how many satellites are actually up there right now? Who put them there? And is Earth's orbit getting dangerously crowded? Let's break it down. Here's the honest answer up front. The exact number depends on who's counting, and it changes constantly. Tracking organizations like Celestrak, the European Space Agency, and independent astronomers all maintain slightly different active satellite catalogs because they draw the line differently on what counts as active. But as of mid-2026, most reputable trackers put the number of active satellites somewhere between *14,000 and 18,000 with commonly cited figures landing right around *16,000 That's active satellites only, meaning spacecraft that are currently functioning and communicating. If you include dead, defunct satellites still drifting in orbit, the total climbs to somewhere around 18,000 to 29,000 objects, depending on the source and what's being counted. And if you go even further, counting every tracked object down to about 10 centimeters, including spent rocket stages and fragments from old collisions, the total number of tracked objects in Earth orbit is now in the tens of thousands. So what actually caused this explosion? The answer comes down almost entirely to one company, SpaceX. SpaceX's Starlink constellation, a network of satellites designed to beam internet access down to Earth, now accounts for roughly 2/3 of every single active satellite currently in orbit. Estimates commonly place the number of active Starlink satellites somewhere around 10,000 to 11,000, and that number continues to grow with regular launches. To put that in perspective, from the launch of Sputnik in 1957 all the way through 2019, a span of 62 years, humanity launched a combined total of roughly 2,000 active satellites. Starlink alone has now launched more than 5 times that number in less than a decade. And SpaceX isn't going to be alone in this space for long. Amazon's Kuiper constellation has already begun deployment, with plans for thousands more satellites. China's Qianfan constellation is also ramping up, with tens of thousands of satellites planned over the coming years. Several other national and commercial mega-constellations are in earlier stages of development as well. This raises an obvious question. Why does it take thousands of satellites to provide internet service, instead of just a handful of large ones? The answer comes down to orbital altitude and coverage. Traditional communications satellites often sit in geostationary orbit, roughly 22,000 miles up, where a single satellite can cover a huge portion of the Earth. But that distance introduces a real problem: signal delay. Data has to travel an enormous distance up and back down, adding noticeable lag. A real issue for things like video calls or online gaming. Constellations like Starlink instead operate in low Earth orbit, just a few hundred miles up, which dramatically reduces that delay. But at that lower altitude, each individual satellite can only cover a relatively small area of the ground below it. To provide continuous, reliable coverage across the entire planet, you need a large number of satellites working together, handing off connections as they move quickly across the sky. That trade-off, lower latency, but requiring far more satellites, is the core engineering reason behind the mega-constellation boom. So who's operating this rapidly growing fleet? The United States operates more active satellites than any other country by a wide margin, but that lead is almost entirely a Starlink effect. Strip Starlink out of the picture, and the U.S. satellite count drops to roughly the same range as China's. China's own satellite fleet has been growing quickly as well, expanding significantly over just the past couple of years, driven largely by its own emerging mega-constellation programs. More than 80 countries have now operated at least one satellite in orbit, a number that keeps climbing as smaller, more affordable satellite technology, like CubeSats, makes space more accessible to smaller nations, universities, and private companies. So while the raw numbers make it look like a two-country race, the underlying trend is actually much broader. More nations and organizations than ever before now have the ability to put something in orbit. Here's where things get genuinely important and a little unsettling. Active satellites are only part of the picture up there. Add in defunct satellites, spent rocket bodies, and tracked debris fragments, and estimates put the total number of tracked objects in Earth orbit somewhere between roughly 28,000 and 46,000, depending on the source and tracking method, and that's just the objects large enough to track directly. Below that threshold, models from organizations like the European Space Agency estimate there are over 1 million untracked objects between 1 and 10 centimeters and more than 100 million smaller than that. At orbital speeds, even a fragment the size of a paint chip can seriously damage or destroy a functioning spacecraft on impact. This growing congestion is exactly why organizations like the US Space Force and the European Space Agency dedicate enormous resources to tracking objects in orbit, constantly monitoring for potential collisions and coordinating maneuvers to avoid them. It's also why space agencies and private companies alike are increasingly focused on designing satellites to safely deorbit and burn up at the end of their working life, rather than lingering as future debris. So where does this trend go from here? Based on current launch pace and announced constellation plans, some industry estimates suggest the total number of active satellites could realistically reach somewhere between *30,000 and 60,000 by around 2030, though that range depends heavily on how many of the currently planned mega-constellations actually reach full deployment on schedule. To be clear, that's a projection, not a certainty. Regulatory hurdles